Although you are no stranger to inclusive academia, can you please introduce yourself, Alex?
My name is Alex Morris Wood. I am the head of school at Franklin Academy in East Haddam, Connecticut. Franklin Academy is a private boarding and day school for neurodivergent learners in grades 8 through 12. And we have a program called Franklin College Connections, which is a postgraduate program where students can earn up to 15 credits at a local community college while learning all of those holistic skills needed to get you ready for life after high school.
Any advice for parents as their students prepare to transition from life at home to life at college?
So when families are getting their neurodivergent child ready for the college application, the interview process, the selection process, I really try to explain to families that this is one of the most authentic assessments as it relates to readiness. As part of my doctorate, I focus on the perspectives of parents as they transition from independent high schools to higher education. And no matter who it was, one of the key factors where families really understood their students' strengths and weaknesses outside of a structured learning environment was the college application process. By allowing that agency for students to start that process on their own with the systems and supports in place that's not you as they parent, really gives you some insight into how they're going to navigate the new world that they're going to encounter once they set foot on that college campus. So for example, if you are asking the student to complete the college essay, most likely a school similar to like a Franklin Academy are working with those students, whether that's in an English class, a college readiness course, on the construction, the editing, and the submission of that essay. Giving some time and some space to see how that student navigates that support system will give you a lot of insight to what is going to happen when that student has to navigate similar support systems in higher education, like utilizing a writing center, talking to their advisor, or going to those office hours after school. So while it's really natural to live in the angst and the fear and the anxieties around college application processes, especially because of the scary deadlines that higher education puts on families, and as somebody that was a VP of admissions, we do that, right? We try to push urgency in admissions. And a large part of what you're going to be experiencing as a parent is the anxiety related to that urgency that is created for you. Know that you have time, right? You do not have to apply early decision. You do not have to apply early action. And if you force the college application process, you're going to be forcing probably a gap in learning and a missed opportunity to assess.
What are some of the key changes parents should expect when their student starts college?
One of the roles I get to have as part of my love of education is to co-chair the Disabilities and Neurodiversity Special Interest Group of the National Association of College Admission Counselors. And what that really provides me is insight into trends related to family involvement, family engagement, and how we really support the separation process that is really difficult, no matter the learning profile of the student, when you transition from high school to college. So what a lot of institutions are doing are earlier orientations, not just for the student, but for the family. So that might include, upon deposit or enrollment in the institution, some summer webinars for families where it's going over the ebb and flow of the academic year. It's reviewing policy changes that you might experience, whether that is with FERPA, HIPAA, the satisfactory academic progress policy. Because what we've all found in higher education is that the role of the parent does not end. It just is supposed to morph. But in order for it to morph, really strong institutions of higher education recognize that psychoeducation is key. Because in a lot of the research we have found is that so often families are not educated in high school about those legal changes. So instead of being reactive, higher ed right now is trying to use that time between commitment and matriculation to guide families through that. At Beacon College, for example, that is why we started the Navigator Prep program, so we can educate families up to 9 months before their entry on the realities of what higher education is going to look like. Once that student starts to get ready for that entry, colleges are starting to create separate parent orientation programs because, again, giving some more insight and more education, more training, more how-to college, right? Will not just help the family navigate the change, but recognize that that family is then going to be more empowered to help their child acclimate to that new living and learning environment, which I think is really critical. Some colleges now around the United States actually have a family engagement office. Very similar to the move around first year retention, colleges are recognizing that if they could increase family involvement in that first year, again, very simply through virtual webinars. Beacon College, when I was there, we started the Family Empowerment Series, where once a month, senior members of the college would give updates about what is going on campus. By incorporating families into the ethos of the institution, what we have seen is that there becomes a decrease in reactive outreach. And ultimately, what it leads to is that the students are empowered to be their own self-advocates.
What can families do to prepare themselves before the student leaves home?
A lot of the work to kind of get parents ready for the changes in college could actually happen before you get to college. It really is about establishing an understanding and a sense of awareness about where the student and the family is currently functioning and what that leap is going to be like in higher education. So before you even get to college, really thinking about and exploring student accommodations. Even more important, are families aware of how the learning environment has been modified? By really establishing a firm understanding about the educational environment of high school, that leap, that bridge to college will be a little clearer, and you're going to be able to understand what are the areas that might cause disruptions or dilemmas for you and your student. Part of that process really needs to also include some parent self-reflection. The families that have really, I found to be the most successful during their transition is when families recognize two things. One, does their motivation drive student behavior and functioning? Meaning that, is the parent really driving the narrative of the student's collegiate experience? Are they picking the courses? Are they determining the college that the student is going to? Are they mandating that they engage in fee-based programs or services? I think so often families have really had to be the advocates for their child that naturally, that just morphs into being the advocate for the child as they transition to college. But over time, what needs to happen is that individuation process needs to occur. Families need to start encouraging their child to develop their own goals, identify the student's own motivation for why they're going to college, and start asking them about their interests, their passions, the activities that they want to be part of. Because once that student steps foot onto that campus, that involvement needs to change, not because of just policy, but because of the geographical separation that's going to happen. Secondly, the next piece of advice I always give families is to be aware of your own projections. It is so natural as a parent to have anxiety, to have fear, to be scared of the unknown. And often our own projections drive our parenting decisions. It is the fundamental aspect of family systems, right? If we're fearful, we're going to kind of laser focus in on a behavior that really supports our fear. And then we're going to drive our parenting decisions around that. And so often that happens so innately because as parents of students who are autistic or who are neurodivergent, you've had to do a lot of rescuing. And you try to rescue before your child falls. But over time, that rescuing needs to decrease. And we have to be aware of the fact that discomfort, perceived failure is all part of the learning process. And being aware of your own projection could really help students develop that resilience that is so often needed once they go to higher education. So let's shift. You've done all of this work, you've built that awareness, you understand the interactional patterns between you and your child and your support system. When you step foot onto that campus, it is being really aware of how the school, the culture of the school embraces the family. Now more colleges are writing family handbooks to help guide you through typical dilemmas that you're going to face as a parent. You're going to probably have a child that has an advisor. So looking through the school's handbook and the policies around, is it appropriate or expected for you to reach out to that advisor? Are you supposed to maybe be there with the student on opening day when they meet their advisor? Or is the expectation, which most colleges have, which is that you are not going to be part of the communication practice? And I think that's sometimes really hard for parents to internalize the why behind it. But if you think about it, an advisor might have 100 students, 50 students on their caseload. They often don't have the bandwidth to work with both the student and the family. So I think what's critical is that when students and their families adjust to college, you're also recognizing that the hands-off model of higher education, again, does not mean they don't want you to be involved. They just don't have the capacity to involve you in the way that you're used to. So some of the great things I've tried to encourage families to do when they've started to recognize that their student is struggling. The first is, if you are going to outreach to an office, one, make sure it's the appropriate office. Colleges are often siloed, and the most frustrating thing for students and often families is when you reach out to an office and they say, we're not the people to handle that, you need to go there. So really taking the time to learn about who are the resources available, what are the departments they oversee, is critical. Secondly, if you are going to reach out in writing. Don't assume that somebody's available on the phone to talk to you. Often we have to go through our own process too to verify that we're even able to talk to you, right? So if your child has not signed that FERPA waiver giving permission to the college to speak to you, often we won't even acknowledge that we know the student. We are going to protect the privacy of that student. Also, very frustrating, we recognize that for families. So by placing it in an email, that allows for the person receiving that communication to do the due diligence and double check that we have all of the correct paperwork at play, that we can legally speak to you about the educational record of your child. The second part of that is when you email that person, always copy the student. That really demonstrates to the person that you are corresponding with that the student is involved in the advocacy process, that you are not circumnavigating a system, that you and the student have talked about this, and that maybe they just don't know how to self-express or self-advocate, and you are just guiding them through it. The families that really benefit from this practice the most are often the ones that explain the why they're reaching out on behalf of the student and concludes with what the student is going to do to follow up. It has to be very clear in this process that the interaction and the problem solving still has to happen between the student and the college, not the parent and the college. The student cannot be taken out of the problem solving process. So by saying something like, Johnny is going to reach out to you during your weekly advising meeting, and his goal is to identify 3 strategies that he can employ with you to make math class more enjoyable or for him to get his work done. Johnny's going to let me know that the outcome of that advising meeting in an email summary, and he's going to copy you as the advisor. So again, what I just did there is I demonstrated the parent reaching out to the advisor, copying the student, the identifying what Johnny's responsibilities are going to be, how Johnny's going to follow up with the advisor and the parent, because ultimately the student is the one that's going to be closing the loop, not the advisor and not the parent. You can also not expect that advisor or that office to collaborate with multiple offices on campus. There's typically a process for that to happen, whether that is a student success team or a care team, but it's often not going to come directly from the family. So if the student is working with a counselor, for example, a mental health counselor, the advisor might not know that because of HIPAA protections. So we can't assume that every single department is collaborating. So if you feel like that you would like a counselor to know, or maybe an RA to know, or the dean of students to be aware, you might have to set up separate emails, always copying that student, and then in that email explain who else you've reached out to. Because what we don't want to do is engage in reactive problem solving and then have everybody reach out to the student on your behalf, and then the student has like 5 or 7 plans. That's not going to work for the student. So you have to be cognizant that you're leaving the world of IEP meetings and case management systems, and you're entering a world that is really process-oriented, that is policy-oriented, and that is student-centered communication and not family-centered communication. So with that, having the expectation that you might not get follow-up right away from that faculty or that advisor is critical.
Big thanks to Franklin Academy's Alex Morris Wood. Please subscribe to Inclusive Academia.